In the land of Uz lived a man whose life seemed aligned with everything many would call blessing. His name was Job, and his existence combined material prosperity, family stability, and an irreproachable reputation. He was not merely wealthy, he was respected. He was not merely influential, he was upright. The true starting point of his story is not his fortune, but his character. Job was blameless, not in the superficial sense of public morality carefully maintained, but in the depths of his conscience. His life was not divided between appearance and reality. There was coherence between his faith and his actions, between his words and his decisions. He feared God, not with irrational terror, but with conscious reverence. He acknowledged divine authority over his life and sought to honor it in every sphere. He also turned away from evil. He did not flirt with wrongdoing or move carelessly near anything that might compromise his relationship with God. His integrity was not passive, it was deliberate. He intentionally avoided what he knew displeased the Lord. He did not simply react when evil appeared, he kept his distance from it before it could take root. His prosperity was remarkable. He possessed vast herds, abundant livestock, and numerous servants. His wealth was neither modest nor hidden, it was extraordinary for his time. He was considered the greatest man among all the people of the East. Yet the narrative does not begin by highlighting numbers, but character. Abundance was visible, but the true strength of Job resided in his heart. His family also reflected blessing. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. His home was a place of celebration and fellowship. His sons held feasts in their houses in turn, inviting their sisters to share in their joy. Life seemed steady and harmonious. There were no visible cracks in his household, no signs of approaching tragedy. Yet even in times of celebration, Job maintained spiritual vigilance. After each cycle of feasting, he would rise early and offer burnt offerings on behalf of each of his children. Not because there was evidence of open sin, but because he understood the fragility of the human heart. He would say to himself, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This concern did not arise from paranoia, but from responsible love. His routine revealed something profound. Job did not only guard his own spiritual life, he interceded for his family. He did not assume that prosperity guaranteed purity. He did not equate joy with holiness. He understood that outward well-being never removes the need for constant dependence on God. This was how Job lived. In abundance, yet with reverence. In prosperity, yet with humility. In celebration, yet with spiritual alertness. His life appeared complete, balanced, and secure. From any human perspective, nothing seemed lacking. And it is precisely from that place of fullness that the conflict begins, the conflict that would transform his life forever. While Job's life unfolded in visible stability on earth, an unseen scene was developing in the heavenly realm. What appeared to be a quiet story of prosperity was about to enter a completely different dimension. The conflict would not begin in his house or in his fields, but in a dialogue that would take place before the throne of God. At a certain time, the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Among them came Satan as well. The scene is not chaotic or uncontrolled, it is ordered. Satan does not act independently but appears under divine authority. Even the accuser moves within boundaries established by God. The Lord took the initiative. He asked Satan where he had come from. The answer was revealing. He had been roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it. He was not passive. His presence implied observation, examination, searching. Then God mentioned Job, not as a victim, but as an example. Have you considered my servant Job? This question was not careless. God himself highlighted Job's character, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and turns away from evil. Job's integrity was not hidden, it was recognized in heaven. Satan's response was an accusation disguised as logic. He suggested that Job's faithfulness was not genuine, but transactional. According to him, Job served God because he was protected, blessed, and surrounded by prosperity. The accuser implied that devotion born in comfort is not true devotion. Remove the blessings, he argued, and Job would curse God. The challenge was set. Satan proposed that human integrity depends on circumstances, that worship thrives only when life is favorable. In essence, he questioned not only Job's faith, but the very possibility of disinterested devotion. God permitted the test, but set clear limits. Everything Job possessed was placed within Satan's reach, but his person was not to be touched. The permission was real, but restricted. Divine sovereignty was not suspended, it defined the boundaries. This moment marks a profound turning point. Job was unaware of what was happening. He had no knowledge of the heavenly debate. No warning. No explanation. His life was about to be shaken without his understanding the reason. Here the true drama begins. The central question is not simply why the righteous suffer, but whether the righteous can remain faithful when everything collapses. The heavenly dialogue establishes a tension that will soon unfold on earth. The test was authorized. And though Job still lived in the calm rhythm of his daily routine, the permission had already been granted. The invisible was in motion. The stage was set. What seemed secure was about to be shaken. The shift was sudden. There were no warning signs, no gradual unraveling that hinted at what was coming. A day that began like any other in Job's life became the most devastating of all. While his sons were gathered in celebration at the house of the eldest, the stability that had defined his existence began to crumble with a speed that left no time to process. The first messenger arrived breathless. He reported that the oxen were plowing and the donkeys grazing nearby when the Sabaeans attacked. They carried off the livestock and killed the servants with the sword. Only one had escaped to tell the story. The loss was not merely financial, it was violent, abrupt, and merciless. Before Job could fully absorb the report, another messenger came. Fire fell from heaven and consumed the sheep and the servants tending them. Again, only one survived to bring the news. The language intensified the horror. It was not described as an ordinary disaster, but as something that seemed to descend from above, overwhelming and destructive. Still, the chain of calamity was not complete. A third messenger arrived with news that the Chaldeans had formed raiding parties, seized the camels, and slaughtered the servants. What had once been visible signs of prosperity vanished in a matter of moments. Each report followed the other without pause, leaving no space for grief to settle. Then came the final blow. A fourth messenger brought the words that pierced deeper than all the rest. A great wind had struck the house where Job's sons and daughters were gathered. The structure collapsed, and all of them died. Not one remained. The loss of wealth was painful, the loss of his children was unbearable. The scene is almost beyond comprehension. Job did not lose gradually, he lost completely. His economy, his legacy, his future generations, gone in a single day. What had been cause for gratitude became emptiness without warning. His reaction was astonishing. He rose, tore his robe, and shaved his head, visible signs of deep mourning. Then he fell to the ground, not in rebellion, but in worship. His first words were not accusations. They were acknowledgment. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away, blessed be the name of the Lord. He did not deny the pain. He did not minimize the devastation. But he recognized that what he had possessed had always been a gift, not an entitlement. His life, his wealth, even his children had ultimately belonged to God. The narrative underscores this clearly. In all of this, Job did not sin nor charge God with wrongdoing. He did not direct blame toward heaven. He did not allow tragedy to distort his reverence. The integrity that marked his prosperity remained intact in his suffering. The heavenly question had begun to receive its answer. Job's faith was not rooted in abundance. His worship was not tied to comfort. When everything collapsed, he chose to bless. Yet the trial was not finished. What began as external loss was about to move inward, touching something even more personal, his own body. After the destruction of his possessions and the death of his children, it might seem that the limit of suffering had already been reached. Yet the narrative shifts once again to the heavenly realm. The sons of God present themselves before the Lord, and once more Satan appears among them. The conflict has not ended, it has entered a deeper phase. God speaks of Job again, not as a defeated man, but as one who still holds fast to his integrity. Despite losing everything, he has remained faithful. The previous accusation has failed. Job did not curse God when stripped of prosperity. But the accuser does not concede. His argument changes. He claims that a man will endure external loss as long as his own life remains untouched. Skin for skin, he implies. According to him, true loyalty will collapse if the body itself is afflicted. Strike his flesh, and he will curse God to his face. God permits a second test, but again establishes limits. Satan may afflict Job's body, but he is forbidden to take his life. The authority granted is real, yet bounded. Divine sovereignty continues to define the parameters of suffering. Then the affliction begins. Job is struck with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. The man once known for dignity and influence now finds his entire body covered in torment. The pain is constant, inflamed, humiliating. He sits among ashes. The image is stark and devastating. Once seated in honor, he now rests in a place of ruin. He takes a piece of broken pottery and scrapes his skin, attempting to relieve the agony. His condition is not momentary discomfort, it is relentless suffering. Physical pain introduces a new dimension. Loss can wound the heart, but bodily affliction penetrates every movement, every breath. There is no escape from it. The trial has moved from external devastation to intimate torment. Yet still, no curse rises from his lips. There is silence, endurance, and restraint. His faith is not expressed through triumphant declarations in this moment, but through refusal to betray his reverence. The heavenly challenge continues to unfold on earth. The question remains, can a man remain faithful when pain is no longer outside him, but within him? The test has reached its most personal level. And now, from within his own household, another voice will attempt to persuade him to abandon the integrity he still holds. In the midst of physical agony and the emptiness left by the loss of their children, a voice breaks the silence, not from heaven, not from distant enemies, but from the most intimate place in Job's life. His wife, who has also suffered the same devastating losses, finally speaks. Her words do not come from cold indifference. They arise from accumulated grief. She too has buried her children. She too has watched their prosperity disappear. She now sees her husband covered in sores, sitting among ashes, scraping his skin in misery. Her question carries exhaustion, confusion, and perhaps bitterness. Do you still hold fast to your integrity? It is not a neutral inquiry. It is a challenge born from disillusionment. From her perspective, faithfulness has brought no protection. Devotion has not prevented tragedy. Reverence has not shielded them from catastrophe. What she sees before her is a man who has lost everything and yet refuses to abandon his trust in God. Then comes the direct suggestion: curse God and die. It is not merely anger speaking. It is an invitation to surrender. It echoes the very accusation raised in heaven: if everything has been taken away, what is the point of remaining faithful? If life has become unbearable, why cling to a devotion that has not spared you? This is a different kind of temptation. It does not arrive through violent loss or sudden calamity, but through emotional exhaustion. It comes from someone who shares the suffering. The pressure is not external, it is relational. Job's response is firm, but not cruel. He does not lash out in rage. He answers with correction: "You speak as one of the foolish women would speak." He does not deny her pain, but he refuses her conclusion. Then he utters words that reveal the foundation of his faith. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive adversity? He is not simplifying the mystery of suffering. He is affirming that his relationship with God is not transactional. If he accepted blessings with gratitude, he cannot now reject hardship with rebellion. His faith is not dependent on comfort. The narrative emphasizes it once again. In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. The integrity questioned in heaven remains intact on earth. Not because he feels no anguish, but because he refuses to let anguish redefine his reverence. The test has reached its most intimate pressure point. When the suggestion to abandon faith comes from someone loved, the struggle deepens. It is no longer merely a theological challenge, it is emotional, relational, personal. And yet Job stands firm. But silence will not last much longer. Soon others will arrive, and with them a new trial will begin, not one of physical pain, but of words, arguments, and flawed interpretations of suffering. News of Job's suffering did not remain confined to his immediate surroundings. 3 of his friends heard about all that had happened and agreed to travel together to see him. Their names were Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, men regarded as wise, representatives of established tradition and theological thought. They did not come to observe from a distance. They came, at least in intention, to sympathize with him and to comfort him. When they saw him from afar, they hardly recognized him. The man once known for dignity, strength, and influence was now physically altered by disease and grief. His appearance had changed so dramatically that they were stunned. The visible signs of suffering were undeniable. Their first response was genuine. They raised their voices and wept. They tore their robes in mourning and sprinkled dust on their heads. These were not casual gestures, they were expressions of deep grief. They entered into his sorrow visibly and openly. Then they sat with him on the ground. For 7 days and 7 nights they remained there without speaking a single word. No advice. No explanations. No correction. Just presence. The silence was heavy, almost sacred. The text makes something clear. They saw that his suffering was very great. There are pains too deep for immediate analysis. There are wounds that do not need explanation in the first moment, but companionship. During those 7 days, the friends did what was right. They did not attempt to fix what they did not understand. The silence honored the depth of the tragedy. It acknowledged that what Job had endured could not be reduced to simple statements. It created space for grief without interruption. But silence cannot last forever. Eventually, words would be spoken. And when they were, the tone of comfort would slowly give way to confrontation. The men who began as mourners would become debaters. For now, however, the image remains powerful. A broken man sitting in ashes, surrounded by friends who weep with him, united in shared silence. The real conflict is about to begin, not against physical pain, but against interpretation. Not against loss, but against explanation. The test of Job's body has already unfolded. Now the test of his theology and his endurance under accusation will begin. After 7 days of unbroken silence, it was Job who first spoke. His opening words were not accusations against his friends, nor direct rebellion against God. They were a lament. He cursed the day of his birth, not in hatred toward life itself, but in anguish over the suffering that now defined his existence. He did not deny God. He did not renounce faith. Instead, he poured out sorrow that had been held in silence for a week. He wished the day of his birth had been erased from the calendar of history. He longed for the darkness to swallow the moment he first entered the world. The weight of living in such agony made existence itself feel unbearable. This lament broke the stillness, and with it began the first cycle of responses. Eliphaz spoke first. His tone initially seemed measured and sympathetic. He reminded Job that he had once strengthened others, that he had encouraged the weary and supported the weak. But soon his words shifted from empathy to implication. Eliphaz appealed to experience and tradition. According to him, suffering does not occur without cause. He suggested that those who sow trouble reap it. In his theological framework, pain is the natural consequence of wrongdoing. If Job is suffering so severely, then somewhere, somehow, guilt must be present. The argument appeared reasonable. After all, much of life does reflect moral consequence. Actions often produce predictable results. But Eliphaz's reasoning assumed a direct and immediate correlation in every case. There was no room in his thinking for mystery. Bildad reinforced the same perspective. He insisted that God does not pervert justice. If Job's children had died, he implied, it must have been because they had sinned. The logic was firm, almost mechanical. God is just, therefore suffering equals punishment. Zophar was even more direct. He accused Job of speaking too freely and suggested that he deserved greater punishment than he had received. To him, Job's protest of innocence was arrogance. What began as comfort turned into accusation. The friends were not cruel in intention, they were rigid in theology. Their belief system could not accommodate the possibility of righteous suffering. For them, the equation was simple: obedience produces blessing, disobedience produces pain. But Job knew something they did not. He knew that his conscience did not confirm their accusations. He was not claiming sinlessness in an absolute sense, but he was certain he was not hiding secret rebellion that explained the magnitude of his suffering. The debate intensified. It was no longer merely about personal loss, it was about the character of God and the nature of justice. Were the friends correct in reducing suffering to punishment? Or was there a dimension beyond human logic? The first round of arguments revealed the fracture. Human wisdom, confident and systematic, stood against lived experience. The discussion would not remain calm for long. Each subsequent exchange would grow sharper, exposing the limits of simplified theology. The test had shifted. Job's body was wounded, but now his integrity and understanding were under scrutiny. As his friends pressed their arguments with increasing certainty, Job did not respond with arrogance, but with clarity. He did not deny God's sovereignty, nor did he claim absolute perfection. Yet he refused to accept the narrow explanation being forced upon him that his suffering must be the direct result of hidden sin. His defense was not pride. It was the voice of a clean conscience. Job acknowledged that no human being can stand fully justified before God on the basis of personal righteousness alone. Yet he also knew he was not living in deliberate rebellion. The scale of his suffering did not align with the life he had lived. The issue was no longer merely personal, it was theological. If suffering always functions as immediate punishment for wrongdoing, then divine justice operates like a simple equation. But Job's experience contradicted that formula. The reality before him was more complex than the tiny system his friends defended. He reflected on the brevity and fragility of life. Human existence, he observed, is like a flower that blooms and quickly fades. It is like a shadow that does not remain. Even without catastrophe, life itself is uncertain and temporary. His grief was not only about loss, it was about the vulnerability woven into human existence. Yet amid his anguish, he expressed a longing. He desired an audience with God. Not to accuse, but to understand. He wanted to present his case before the one who governs all things. Human arguments had proven insufficient. Only a direct encounter with the divine could resolve the tension within him. His friends remained unmoved. They clung to their conviction that divine justice cannot be inconsistent. In their reasoning, admitting the possibility of innocent suffering would undermine God's moral order. Therefore, Job must be guilty, even if the evidence was unseen. But Job began to observe something troubling. He pointed out that the wicked sometimes prosper. There are instances where those who defy God live in comfort, grow wealthy, and die peacefully. Reality did not consistently support the theory of automatic retribution. His faith did not collapse. Though he spoke with intensity and at times with anguish, he did not abandon belief in God's greatness. He recognized divine wisdom as far beyond human comprehension. His struggle was not against God's existence, but against the explanation of his condition. The debate sharpened. Each exchange revealed more clearly the difference between experience and theory. The friends defended a system. Job defended his integrity. He was not demanding that God conform to his expectations. He was asking that his suffering not be falsely labeled as punishment without evidence. The tension deepened. Words grew heavier. Positions hardened. What began as consolation had become confrontation. And in the midst of it all stood a man wounded in body, accused in spirit, yet unwilling to confess a guilt his conscience did not acknowledge. The conflict was far from over. As the debate intensified and the arguments circled without resolution, Job's focus shifted. He no longer sought to convince his friends. Their framework was fixed, their conclusions predetermined. What he longed for now was not vindication before men, but clarity before God. His suffering had moved beyond physical agony. It had become existential. He felt trapped between what he knew of God's greatness and what he was experiencing in his own life. He believed in divine justice, yet he could not reconcile that belief with his circumstances. The tension was unbearable. He spoke of God's majesty. He described the one who shakes the earth from its place, who commands the sun not to shine, who seals up the stars. He acknowledged the Creator who alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. There was no doubt in his mind about God's power. Yet that very greatness intensified his dilemma. How can a human being contend with such a God? If the Almighty is infinitely wise and powerful, who could question him? Who could demand explanation? Job felt the weight of this imbalance. Even if he were innocent of the charges implied by his friends, how could he present his case before the judge of all creation? This led him to express one of his deepest longings. He wished for a mediator, someone who could lay a hand on both God and himself. Not to judge God, but to bridge the distance between finite humanity and infinite sovereignty. He needed someone who could make the conversation possible. The desire reveals something profound. Job did not seek independence from God, he sought access to him. He did not reject divine authority, he wanted dialogue. His faith was strained, but not severed. He also acknowledged the fragility of life. Days passed swiftly, he said, faster than a runner, like ships skimming the water, like an eagle swooping down on its prey. Life moves quickly, and suffering consumes the present. In that brevity, the absence of understanding felt overwhelming. At times, despair surfaced. He wondered what purpose remained in defending himself when his suffering continued unchanged. He felt as though God was distant, as though the weight of divine power pressed upon him without explanation. Yet even in his anguish, a thread of hope remained. He did not deny that God is just. He did not abandon the conviction that, ultimately, righteousness matters. But he struggled to see how that righteousness operated in his case. The friend's explanations had failed. The theological system that equated suffering with punishment did not fit reality. Job's experience demanded a deeper understanding. The conversation had reached its limit. Human reasoning had exhausted itself. The longing for a divine response had become central. And that response, though not in the form Job expected, was drawing near. After long stretches of silence, debate, accusation, defense, and lament, the moment finally arrived. The voice Job had been longing to hear broke into the narrative, not gently, not in a whisper, but with unmistakable authority. The Lord answered out of the whirlwind. It was not a calm philosophical dialogue. It was not a detailed explanation of heavenly conversations or hidden purposes. It was a revelation of presence and power. God's response began not with answers, but with questions. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? The approach was striking. Rather than addressing Job's suffering directly, the Lord expanded the frame of reference. He drew Job's attention to creation itself, the laying of the earth's cornerstone, the measurement of its boundaries, the limits placed on the sea. The message was not dismissive. It was corrective in scale. If Job could not comprehend the mechanics of the physical universe, how could he claim full understanding of divine governance? The questions were not meant to humiliate, but to reorient. God spoke of the dawn. He described commanding the morning, assigning its place, shaking the wicked from the edges of the earth. He pointed to the depths of the sea, to the gates of death, to the expanse of light and darkness. Each image stretched beyond human comprehension. Then the Lord described creatures of the wild. The mountain goats that give birth unseen. The wild donkey roaming freely. The ox that refuses human control. The hawk soaring by instinct. These were realities beyond Job's management. They existed under divine care without human oversight. The discourse grew more vivid. God described Behemoth, strong, unmovable, untamable. Then Leviathan, fearsome, breathing fire and poetic imagery, beyond human domination. These creatures symbolized forces of creation that man could not command. The point was unmistakable. Job had asked for an explanation of his suffering. God revealed his sovereignty instead. The issue was not whether Job deserved pain, but whether he understood the magnitude of the one who governs all things. The response did not answer why. It answered who. The Lord did not justify himself. He did not recount the heavenly challenge. He unveiled his greatness. In doing so, he invited Job to trust beyond comprehension. The whirlwind was not an evasion. It was revelation. Human logic had reached its boundary. The debate had exhausted its arguments. The only sufficient response was divine presence. Now the question shifted. Not why am I suffering, but who is God in the midst of it? And in that shift, everything would change. When the voice from the whirlwind ceased, the atmosphere had changed. Job had not received a detailed explanation of his suffering. He had not been told about the heavenly dialogue that initiated his trial. Yet something far deeper had occurred. He had encountered God. His response was no longer defensive. It was humble. He acknowledged that he had spoken of things too wonderful for him to understand, realities beyond the limits of human comprehension. His words were not a confession of secret wickedness, but an admission of limited perspective. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. This statement marks a turning point. Job's knowledge of God had once been rooted in tradition, instruction, and experience. Now it was rooted in encounter. The suffering that had seemed senseless had led him into a deeper awareness of divine majesty. He repented in dust and ashes. Not necessarily for a specific hidden sin that caused his tragedy, but for having tried to measure the infinite with finite understanding. His humility was not humiliation, it was alignment. He recognized his place within a reality governed by wisdom far beyond his own. Then the Lord turned to the friends. In a surprising reversal, God declared that they had not spoken rightly about him as Job had. Though Job had questioned, lamented, and wrestled, his words had been honest. The friends, by contrast, had defended a rigid theology that reduced divine justice to a predictable formula. Their certainty had misrepresented God. They had insisted that suffering must equal punishment. They had spoken confidently about matters they did not fully understand. God instructed them to offer sacrifices. And even more significantly, he commanded them to go to Job and ask him to pray on their behalf. The man they had accused would now intercede for them. Restoration would begin not only with material blessing, but with reconciliation. Job prayed for his friends. There was no record of bitterness, no demand for apology first. He stood in the role of mediator, ironically fulfilling the very longing he had once expressed for himself. In praying for them, he demonstrated that suffering had refined rather than hardened his character. Then came restoration. The Lord restored Job's fortunes, doubling what he had previously possessed. His brothers and sisters returned, offering comfort and gifts. Wealth returned, not as a reward for perfection, but as an expression of divine mercy. He had children again, sons and daughters. The text highlights the beauty of his daughters and notes that they were given inheritance alongside their brothers, a detail that signals abundance and honor. The family line continued. Life moved forward. Job lived many more years. He saw his children and grandchildren to the 4th generation. His story did not conclude in ashes, but in longevity and peace. The restoration did not erase the suffering, but it revealed that suffering did not have the final word. Job's journey began in prosperity, passed through devastation, wrestled with mystery, encountered divine revelation, and concluded in renewed blessing. His story was no longer merely about loss. It had become testimony. The story of Job is not simply an ancient account of loss and restoration. It is a profound exploration of faith under pressure, of suffering without simple explanation, and of divine sovereignty beyond human calculation. Job began as a blessed man. He had wealth, influence, family, and honor. But the true foundation of his life was not what he possessed, it was who he was. His integrity defined him long before tragedy tested him. When everything was taken, his reverence remained. He did not deny his pain. He did not silence his anguish. He lamented deeply. He questioned. He struggled. Yet he did not sever his relationship with God. The narrative does not offer easy answers. It does not claim that all suffering is punishment. It does not promise that righteousness guarantees immediate prosperity. Instead, it presents a reality that is both more difficult and more profound. Pain can exist within divine purpose without being fully understood. God never explained the reason for the trial. He revealed himself instead. And that revelation proved greater than explanation. Job's understanding did not expand into complete comprehension, but it expanded into deeper trust. Encounter replaced speculation. The friends had attempted to defend God with rigid formulas. But Job's honest wrestling proved more faithful than their certainty. His willingness to speak from wounded sincerity, rather than from detached theory, aligned more closely with divine truth. The restoration at the end of his life was real. But it was not the central lesson. The true victory was not the doubling of possessions, but the preservation of integrity. Not the return of comfort, but the transformation of perspective. Job's legacy is not that he never doubted. It is that he never abandoned God in his doubt. He teaches that faith is not the absence of questions, it is the refusal to walk away when answers delay. That integrity is not proven in prosperity, but in endurance. That divine sovereignty does not eliminate suffering, but governs it. The book closes with peace. But it does not close with simplistic theology. It leaves space for mystery. It affirms that God's wisdom exceeds human reasoning, and that trust sometimes stands where explanation cannot. Job's life became testimony. A testimony that righteousness is not transactional. That reverence is not conditional. That God is worthy of worship not only when He gives, but also when He allows what we do not understand. And perhaps that is the enduring message. True faith is not built on comfort, but on conviction. Not on clarity, but on trust. Not on having every answer, but on knowing the one who holds them. The same God who permitted the storm sustained the servant through it. And in the end, His sovereignty proved greater than suffering.